Hello, everybody. Welcome back for another week of Growing with My Fellow Growers. I'm your host, Jack Greenstock, joined as always by an amazing panel. I'm going to pass it over first, as I usually do, to Spartan Grown. Welcome back.
Thank you, Jack. Happy Easter, everybody. Happy Easter, everybody watching on the show or maybe on the replay. It's been a great day, a great weekend for me. I hope everybody else also had a great weekend. But I'm Spartan Grown. You can find me on Instagram at Spartan Grown, all one word with no spaces. Or you can shoot me an email at spartangrown@gmail.com and I will help you with any of your cannabis growing questions.
Great to have you back, and always good to share that email because, like you've mentioned in the past, that's one of the things that it's going to be a lot harder for them to block or take away from us. Not to say that they can't. I wouldn't put past the technology people in control, but you never know. I think email is definitely a solid form of communication that is pretty consistent for us out there. But with that said, I'll pass it over next to the American one.
Hello, Jack and panel and everyone in chat. Happy Easter, everybody. For those celebrating, I am the American one on YouTube and the American one _with_Keens on the IG. And yeah, it's always good to be here. I hope everyone had a great week.
We're happy to have you back, and having a great week myself so far. Feeling a bit better. I've been having a lingering ear issue that's finally getting cleared up a little bit, and happy about that for sure. Never take your health for granted, obviously. Good when you start to feel better. And with that said, we've got Matthew Gates joining as well.
Yeah, hey everyone. Actually, very excited to say that I posted my big russet mite video just now an hour ago. So you can check that out after you watch this, of course, if you're interested to know everything you wanted to know about russet mites. And yeah, I'm an IPM specialist, so I'm excited to talk about pest stuff if we have any springtime issues to go over and chat.
Well, that's a good little Easter egg that you just dropped for your plug there for the russet mite stuff. So maybe we could talk a little bit about eggs of things like russet mites or other pests, as we don't have a topic today. So if you are in the chat right now, make sure you click on over to the live chat, or make sure it says all messages versus top messages so you can see all the messages if you don't want to have them randomly filtered out by YouTube. And with that said, you can tag me at Jack Greenstock or at Cheap Home Grow, and I'll see those highlighted in my chat. And maybe we'll get to as many as we can. But yeah, it'd be nice to maybe start it off with a little bit of IPM stuff, and maybe you could tease a little bit of the good information from the ultimate russet mite video, because I know you probably put tons and tons of work into that, so you've probably got a lot fresh on the mind.
Yeah, I definitely do. I will say up front that this is like a russet mite overview video, so it's not just going to be about our, terrible friend, hemp russet mite particularly, but there's a big emphasis on it. I make a point to say that, like, in the past, there were other species that used to dominate, like, when researchers are thinking, like, what's the worst russet mite that people deal with? Coconut russet mite's a big one, apparently. Wheat is a huge one, wheat curl mite, but tomato russet mite, probably the most well-researched one. But hemp russet mite is probably, I think at this point, I think it gains the most attraction for the last decade and a half, and we all know why that is. I would say that the interesting thing about russet mites for me, the thing that we've talked about a lot, is that they reproduce really fast. They reach their adulthood really quickly in a little over a week. So like maybe 7 to 9 days in most cases. And they have a really interesting history that you can learn more about on the video. But basically, they're actually, they have a lot of genes that they don't have a lot of genes that a lot of other relatives have. They become really small, and I guess the long story short is that their genome, the collection of genes that makes up them, is super deteriorated. It has lost a bunch of things that basically makes it incapable of attacking other kinds of plants. So most russet mites are specialists, and they don't have a lot of ability to like resist certain compounds. So people shouldn't be afraid of russet mites necessarily. I mean, they can become a problem and they can be a threat. I would consider them a high threat, but I think it kind of demystifies them a little bit to know that actually they're kind of weak individually. And if you catch them quickly with a good crop scout and a good reactive plan, which we go over in the video, there's several preventative ways you can go about it for different species, then that works out really well. Yeah, I don't want to monologue too much, but if
I
you
have a
want to,
follow-up question just for
yeah.
myself personally. I know
Yeah.
that they're extremely small. So as far as crop scouting goes, if somebody doesn't have like 20/20 vision, or even if they do, I've been hearing that it's very difficult to spot them. Is there any tips or advice you would have for easier identification than maybe just using your eyes? And yeah, I guess you can go from there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So typically you'll see the damage first. This is true for cannabis, definitely. Um, no, actually, belay that. It's not necessarily the case. In some cases, in my experience, this has pretty much never been the case. I've only had one case where it might be kind of like this. Some people have reported that despite russet mites being on the plants, the damage hasn't become super distorted. I often talk about how it becomes gnarled or curled, and there's this like wrinkly, corrugated look to it. That's kind of unique. It's kind of unique because of the saliva that they inject into the plant. It really plays havoc with the plant's hormones and causes all kinds of weird distortions. But sometimes you don't get that in cannabis. And I think that you could maybe call this resistance potentially. I don't know for sure, but I guess, what else do you call something that is normally a problem that causes dysfunction and disformation or deformation and then isn't there? I think whatever you want to call it, it seems like the intensity, whether it's because the russet mites are sucking or because the plant is very resistant, whatever the reason, it seems like that does happen. There are reports of this being the case. So I don't want to.
Was it like a low volume?
Doesn't it
No.
decrease yield though, Matthew, even if it's not gnarling the plant up?
I think so, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, yeah, I think that they're definitely they're definitely like attacking and harming the plant, and that's going to cause an effect, definitely. But I just wanted to say that I often rely, and I think in almost all of my cases, it's been the case that you can see a really severe damage. But I guess there are some people that are reporting that some of their cannabis plants have a bunch of russet mites, but the leaf distortion is kind of minimal. So that's kind of interesting, and not something I've experienced, but people outside of my own experience have reported. And so I think it's important to mention that as well. So that's a good question, Jack. I'm glad you brought that up.
Dow, did you have a question there as well? Or did you already ask?
Yeah. He asked if they were if it's still a problem for the plant, like if it's still going to have a yield cost, and I would say yes.
Okay, good point there. I was reading chat a little bit and also looking at this joint I'm going to smoke later. It's a cross joint from the legal market, which is
oh wow,
kind of interesting. And this is the packaging right here. But if you hold the joint over the thing, it's like actual size. It comes in a little plastic thing like here.
That's kind of nice.
And yeah, the wife and I are going to smoke that after the show. So I figured I'd.
Are you going to like entomb it in like stone first and then like move the boulder out of the way and then
after a few days?
Yeah. Well, no, today. I mean,
I don't want to be blinded, so I think I'll pass that on that process. At least the people who were allegedly in front of the cave were blinded, if I'm remembering correctly.
Oh yeah, that is the story. I tell you what, I'll just say from personal experience, those soldiers that lost Jesus, I all of those soldiers in their platoon got it. They all got punished for it. Probably lots of push-ups, lots of sit-ups. Probably had to run a bunch. Not a good day, not fun. Probably some demotions. Anyways, Cheddar Bob 13 asks if somebody has something to say. I don't want to bogart.
No, that's perfect. I think if there's a question, I just hadn't seen it yet, so it'd be a perfect transition.
Cheddar Bob asks, can you talk about those moth caterpillars and how they may have wound up on the outside of the bed and why they'd be thriving? Yeah, so Cheddar Bob sent me some pictures, which I don't have at my disposal to like kind of share screen about, but it was very interesting. Yeah, that looks pretty nice. I'm surprised. I don't really know what I was looking at. There are larvae out there that can look like moth caterpillars, but then could possibly be beetles. But I'm pretty sure these are moth larvae, and they were like a grayish color, and they were like outside of this like I think it was a fabric pot, and they were walking across like the median where the end of the pot meets whatever the whatever was resting on, which I can't remember off the top of my head. But it was very weird. I don't know how they could have gotten there and why they were there. And I imagine that there wasn't a whole lot of damage, like because the caterpillars maybe weren't like budworms, like maybe they would just eat the leaves of the plant potentially. But honestly, I just didn't recognize them, which I guess is a good thing because they might be kind of an incidental pest. I like to think that I know pretty much all of the real nasty ones that people are dealing with. But yeah, I really don't know. I am stumped, unfortunately.
I have another cannabis related topic. It's not IPM, but this cross joint brand, funny enough.
Before we move from that,
Oh, yeah.
Matthew, would BTK work there to mess them up?
Oh, those caterpillars? I think so. Yeah. I think so because again, they are caterpillars as long as you expose them to it. A lot of times they have to eat it or ingest it in some way. So like I think that sort of ironically, because they were just kind of crawling along, I don't know if the efficacy might be lowered a little bit. But yeah, if you spray them, I think you're going to get enough on them and in them that's going to be a problem for them. Good question.
So this is sort of on the different topic, but it reminded me a little bit of the Josie Wales and Gorilla Glue naming controversy. This brand is called High Mind, but when they first were trying to drop, they were calling themselves High Einstein, and they were using like a cartoon version of Einstein, and they got Einstein Association or whatever sued them or whatever, so they had to change their name and stop. They had to throw away all their packaging. So I think it's just another good reminder of having original names and branding being a very important thing in the cannabis space. As a business, it's a legal business now in a lot of places. And even if you're in the gray, unregulated, illicit, whatever market you want to refer to it as, eventually it might become legal where you're at. And then all those years you have as like a legacy operator can act in your favor a little bit. And if your brand is one that you actually came up with on your own and used an original name, it can really, benefit you. And you won't have to go through some of the legal bullshit that so many different brands have. I mean, Skittles was a recent one that I can think of. Cookies from Girl Scout Cookies, GG4. I mean, many, many more out there as well. But Heinstein being one of the most recent ones. Now High Mind with these cross joints. But constant reminders, I guess, that lawyers exist and they're not afraid to make some money on both sides. So
yeah, I'm surprised a little bit. Like, not that I definitely agree actually with what happened, the result, but like I'm kind of surprised. They must be really, really fastidious with the like Einstein IP or whatever. I don't know how that works exactly, but
they really want to protect that, intellectual domain, and I guess they don't want it.
Were they really popular?
I don't even think they were. It's a fairly small brand.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, like it seemed like that's what I was surprised about, like the notoriety. Like, wow, they must be like ears to the ground.
Right, because it wasn't even like they were calling it like Einstein weed or something. It was like High Einstein. It was like a partial word and a cartoon. It wasn't like a actual photo of him, but it was his likeness was used too much.
I see. Yeah, that will do it. Yeah, that'll do it. Man, but like, wow. Makes me wonder if like that's happened to like, like schools or whatever who try to like make a little like Einstein reference for something. Maybe something that's more than a little. Anywho,
It's funny because some stuff isn't protected like that at all. Like I saw a shipping company that had like George Washington's face, and they were called like Washington Shipping, and it looked like a giant quarter on the side of their like trucks.
oh, I love it. Yeah.
So it's just like who gets control of the legacy and the rights, and then how much do they want to protect it? Like the guy who says, I won't even say it because I'm actually worried that they would probably try and like claim the show. We don't even fucking advertise on this, but yeah, they're the boxing announcer, his last name is Buffer. The one does the UFC and one did like the other the big time boxing stuff. And he would say, let's get, and I'm not going to finish the end of the phrase. But yeah, people probably know what I'm referring to. And that guy, he's very like litigious about it. He goes and sues everybody. It's kind of like the happy birthday used to be like owned by
Yeah.
somebody, but then finally that got fought in court. And then finally you can sing happy birthday in public now. Like, but people still at restaurants sing like happy birthday instead of the typical happy birthday to you, blah, blah, blah. But all sort of
You have to protect it or else it goes away. I know there's this great commercial from Velcro where like they hired all these actors that look like lawyers to be like, we really love that you love our product so much. You know, we're such a well-known brand. But if you call everything that's a hook and a loop system a Velcro, then we can't call it Velcro anymore because it becomes unprotected or whatever it goes. And like, so they're like, please, if you like Velcro, don't call it Velcro. I was like, that's just amazing. I don't know. That's weird.
it's funny that duct tape, there's a brand out there that's called duct tape now.
Yeah.
Because I think so many
Yeah.
people like either mispronounced it or like got used to just calling it duct tape. Like
Yeah.
it sounds close enough. I like Gorilla Tape, like not to throw like brands out there. They have this clear Gorilla Tape in particular. I've used that shit like outdoor, and it's pretty very. I saw a Mythbusters way back in the day that used duct tape to hold a car together, and they pretty much like taped the bumper on, the windshield on, and just used duct tape basically for every single part that they could that wasn't like absolutely pivotal functioning like axles and things like that. But as much duct tape as they could hold this car back together with, and they took it on like an off-road course, and the shit held together. So it was pretty damn impressive. I must say, I've been surprised by the strength and quality of that kind of stuff, especially like little grow hack stuff around. If you need to tape something up, it can prevent airflow, create a good seal, even be watertight and waterproof if you implement it properly and don't have too much weight of water on there. So certainly a good grow tool. I'm sure many out there have already got a roll probably in sight somewhere in their house that they could bust out when they need it. I know you can even use it to repair your plant wounds. If you snap your plant when you're doing LST, you could use a little duct tape. I know it's stickier than most. I prefer painter's tape for that activity, but Doc likes to use the grafting tape, which I tried and I actually don't like too much because it doesn't want to stick to itself or much of anything, but it does work if you can get it to wrap itself up nice and tight. But sometimes a broke plant wound is like so sensitive. I just think a little strip of painter's tape, you get it nice first wrap and then go around easy, and you can peel it off easy too, which is the beauty. Because when it grows,
I love how they came out with a duct tape that's different colors, and I go for the white duct tape, and then use that white duct tape because I have panda film in my rooms, so to do the seams, and the floor, because I have it. My panda film goes down, and then it actually goes probably makes a 90-degree corner, and probably a foot down onto the floor before. And so I secure that down onto the floor with white duct tape. I just love being able to have white and not gray, because to me, I want white on white, man. So
I used to high jump, and they use tape like that to put your mark down. And like, there's like all sorts of crazy. I got like tie-dye tapes, fucking like bright orange, like, like reflective fucking, you could see it all the way across the track. But yeah, it's a good product for sure. And it can definitely be used in the grow for lots of reasons. Panda film. I've been pretty impressed by like the Orca film. I know it's a lot more expensive, but anything beats black, as we've seen in our buddy Dog Doctor's little anecdotal test there. But even in general testing with lights, you can realize reflective material is a lot better than black and white. Even like flat white paint is a pretty damn good reflector. So a lot of grow rooms implement that. I think it's kind of cool when you go into a grow room that like is in between crops and they're cleaning it out. It's just pretty much like all white, everything pretty much, like white walls, white trays, white floors, like everything is white. Even like some of the lights, the fans and everything is just like, it looks like a lab, you know. It's like the level of technology and efficiency, and like a really well built out one is a beautiful thing to see.
It's kind of what we're shooting for with the Tricone Forge, my little project with Baked Pone, with those PVC walls. You go into those grow, and we have like 12-foot ceilings in there. So it's like you go in there and it's the ceiling is that PVC, all the walls are that PVC. And the only thing that isn't white is the concrete floor, which is, you know, gray concrete.
And I think it's maybe even overkill to make the floors reflective, because the plants should be capturing most of the photons that are above it. And I don't know. I think for your eye purposes, it's nice to have a different color surface that's not black, but, you know, at least different than white.
I told Baked, I said, it's like walking into one of those photo boxes people buy for taking bud shots for, you know what I mean? It's just a crazy feeling
It's a
walking in.
really big one, huh?
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
cool. Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. So to get off subject, I got a question for Matthew Gates that he might know this answer. It's about the plant more than the bugs, but you know, they talk about SAR, systemic acquired resistance, I think.
Yeah.
So if that is a real thing and it is triggered on the plant, will it last forever? Like, can I trigger the plant and then take cuttings off of it, and as it perpetuate cuttings, it'll have that same resistance? Or does it need to be injected or whatever, hit with stuff that will cause it to create it again?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because the answer is mostly yes. You will have to refresh the triggered mechanism.
Okay.
But then you put a really interesting point here, which is like, if you take cuttings or whatever, what's the ramifications of that? So like, there's some cool research that basically shows that plants, because they can't move away from a threat, they have to take their resources and they got to divide it up. We've talked about it before, between growth and defense, basically. And so what's interesting is that plants will sometimes develop like a reaction, so that if they get hit with like the same kind of threat again, and also if they get hit with a different threat in the future, like say a chewing mouthpart insect versus a fungal biotroph like powdery mildew, you know, it seems like they will respond differently depending on the history of what they've gotten, and it also will change with things that they hadn't gotten before as well. So I think that the systemic acquired resistance effect mostly kind of goes away, but there could be something to be said of like tissue that has been exposed to a threat and then is, you know, used as a cutting for later. Like maybe there is some like knockoff effects. I don't know though, but it's a very curious question when you put it that way.
Matthew, my understanding is not very great with the systemic required resistance or acquired response. But in my mind, the way my head kind of made sense of it was it kind of, and I'm just asking if this is the case. Pretty much the plant's defenses are usually some kind of oxidizing agent. That's pretty much how it defends itself from things. And so what I was thinking in my head was, okay, so it just puts more oxidizing agents throughout its system. And I imagine the same thing, what you were just kind of talking about, how what you're using resources there rather than using it for growth. So in the end, is it a great thing? Or, I mean, it's a great thing if you have a pressure, but if you're going to, am I thinking right to think that, are you still making a sacrifice to growth when you don't have a pressure and your other IPMs, you know, standards keep that pressure down? Is it worth it to make that trade-off?
Yeah, and I think that it is in some ways. Like for example, when we're talking about this sort of systemic triggering, right? So like the very basic effect is like, let's say caterpillar larva starts biting on some tissue. Well, we've learned that if you just pinprick a plant, if you just do physical damage to a plant, even if you try to emulate the like cutting and all of that, it doesn't make the same response as a full-on caterpillar, because there's a physical response to damage that's occurring, and then there's also a more nuanced reaction to like, elements in the saliva and the chitin that shaves off of their carapace as they're chomping on the tissue. This gets sense, and then the triggers go out throughout the plant, and there's this song and dance between the immune systems of the plant, and the caterpillar is trying to suppress that and things like that. But basically what I'm trying to say is that there are ways that you can trigger certain immune responses that I think are going to have a cost. It all has a cost, but they're going to have a cost that's not going to maybe be as elaborately problematic for like what you're saying, like with growth. At the same time, though, you would probably want to trigger those things. I think, like you say, that's why I say ideally, like if you could, like just like a god, if you could just like snap your fingers and be like, triggered. I want this to trigger now. Then you'd want to do it right before a pest outbreak, because you have no way that you would not be able to avoid. I think for exactly that reason, just so you could maximize that, because like you say, there is a little bit of a cost, and whether it's so the reaction that you're talking with oxidants, that happens with some things like with those biotrophs, because a lot of times it's like a Star Wars like spaceship problem, where like you have like a fire come up, or like an explosion happens on the hull, and you're like, well, we got to shut all that off. That's all that problem now. So it's kind of like what they do is they'll literally like oxidize their own cell and destroy it for a lot of different pathogens. And so in that way, it's kind of like that won't trigger if the right thing isn't sensed, though, which I guess is what I'm trying to get to that. So some of those more dire reactions really won't happen unless you emulate it. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's probably better err on the side of caution and go ahead and hit them triggers if you can.
Yeah, for some things, certainly, yeah.
Well,
I think,
is it like
you first.
As far as that trigger goes, if it like was like a video game where you could flip a switch and it's like on off, I am imagining that when you hit it with something like chitinase can trigger some sort of small amount of some SAR, and so it's on, but then it's not like, I'm imagining, going to be on for the rest of its life. Maybe it's on
Right,
for
it's like
a week or a few days,
some hour. Usually it's like a range between like minutes to hours, because like those triggers will then trigger other triggers. And like I'm trying to be vague, partly because it's still kind of like latent research, and also because we don't know all the answers. But yeah, it's kind of like think of it like pouring water onto like a bed sheet, and then having like that water kind of move out from the focal point. That's kind of how it happens. It's like a web, that kind of like grows slowly over hours and days to a peak for some things, and then it kind of stays at that plateau, and then and then declines either rapidly, very sharply, or more slowly.
It's funny because I think many growers, newer or experienced, may have learned somewhere along the way that something triggers SAR, and then they kind of just assume that that plant has it now for life, like a shield.
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh, I used insect frass, now I've got SAR for good. And it's like maybe on that transplant for a few days, or maybe a week if we're really lucky, and it does maybe stay in the soil. But I think I wonder how long it's active for and how effective it actually is, and how it would be best implemented. I think it would definitely matter which pests that you're facing and what plant you're growing and what stage of growth you're in, because maybe it's not even really necessary. Like if you're in veg and something that's coming along that could be easily killed by sulfur, I'm just going to hit it with sulfur versus trying to like hope that the SAR works for the plant. But if I'm
exactly
deep in flower or something, maybe I might top dress something to try and get an SAR. If like I'm in an area that I know, oh, this time of flower, there's like thrips or something coming each season, just like they did the last year, whatever it is, like trying to get some sort of resistance if you can. But It seems like a pretty specific thing to be implemented in an IPM strategy when you really are familiar with your climate, pest risks, and things like that. I saw somebody said regalia is a triggers the SAR for powdery mildew. So that might be
Yeah.
something if you're in an area that is high risk for PM to spray before those cold or wet seasons where you're typically going to start to see that PM build.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And although I don't think I've overtly come across that as much for me personally, I have come across it a little bit, that sort of idea about like how the immune response may or may not be permanent, or to what degree it kind of lasts. And I think that I think it's also important to note that if you could like reliably, because people also know that like in some cases like trichome growth, or the consistency, or I'm sorry, the constitution of different trichomes will change, maybe based on some of these effects. So like if you could reliably hit a plant with a stimulus that elicits a response that gives you like, a bunch more sesquiterpenes, and maybe it's so nuanced that like you can really only expect it with like a certain cultivar or whatever.
What I've seen the
That I think
most,
would.
have you seen, I'm sorry to cut you off, Matthew, but
Oh, no
there's a
problem, no
product,
problem.
there's a product that is supposed to like, you're supposed to spray it. I think it's called Oxen or something like that, but they're claiming it, I think it's harpin proteins are
Oh yeah,
causing
yeah,
this
yeah,
response. So
yeah,
there is that product I know of that is supposed to be using this concept of the cellar. I just don't know if it works. I've never really.
yeah. Actually, I hear really good things about that particular kind of I don't know if it's that specific product, but that particular class of compound.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what made me bring it up. Talking about it on Eagle's show, someone was talking about they use that, and they say it actually increases the trichomes, and it has other benefits as well as doing the SARS on the plant. And yeah, that's what I was questioning, because that shit's expensive.
Yeah, it really,
Whether it
yeah.
would last forever.
Yeah, my understanding is that like some of this stuff, if people, for long-time listeners, some of these what are called biorational pesticides, or biorational products that are meant to kind of have this like kind of this effect that's sort of nuanced, right? That's kind of hard to like track. I try to stay away from things like that for the obvious reason that it's hard to track. So like I kind of feel bad recommending something, if people can't easily track it, because even if it's right, it's maybe maybe it's a problem, and they don't really necessarily know if it works or not, and that's not great. But in the world of agriculture, those proteins, those harpin proteins, they kick some stuff's ass for sure. So it's one of the more legitimate ones, I feel like, whereas some other products might be a little bit more ineffable.
Good to hear that
But
there's
it's
some efficacy. I want to take a second to welcome Dr. MJ, who just joined us to the show.
nice.
Cheers, Doc.
Hello, I'm here. Sorry, I'm running a little bit late today, but I made it.
Yeah, that's
Happy
kind of what
Easter.
this holiday is about.
Yeah, I guess, right? Easter. Indeed. So I hope everybody's having a happy Easter. Yeah, I'm Dr. MJ Coco from Coco for Cannabis, and I'm happy to be here.
We're talking a
Nice.
little systemic acquired resistance or response, and
Okay.
like how long it had lasted and different ways to trigger it. That kind of led to the conversation that you came in. Well, you probably heard the last little bits of it there. We've talked about a few different things there, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts or comments on that general strategy there.
No, I don't have to come in hot. I'll kind of get up to speed here as we keep going, so I'm fine right now. Thank you.
Do you know much about harpin proteins? Not to put you on the spot right there.
I don't know much about harpin protein.
To be honest, I wish I knew more. So yeah, that's okay. That's okay. That was a Hail Mary, which is appropriate.
Indeed.
Moonfox says, I've got some quality Jesus jokes. It's true. Lots of history here in the United States. Nothing too irreverent, I hope. I'm not offending anyone.
We probably will, but you know what? At the end of the day, I think we haven't been too over the edge. So,
No.
interesting
No,
enough,
actually, oh yeah, you go first.
the place that my wife works carries the cross joints that I was talking about earlier, and she put them on sale on Easter week because one, they just haven't been moving super well, but she wanted to market it as like cross joints for Jesus, but her boss was like, no, that's too, risque. But
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think probably the right decision from a professional standpoint. But yeah, I think
Well,
some people would pick them up. You never know.
for Jesus.
I agree
then.
with you
We'll
too.
do Jesus instead.
Jesus.
Yeah.
They should do, yeah, like you know how Coca-Cola
I mean-
writes people's names on the stuff? Just start writing random ass names on boxes. Like this cross joint is for Jesus. Or
Like a diacritical mark. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
Oh,
there's a
yeah,
good
there you
idea.
go. Smart.
All right. So what do they retail at, Mr. Greenstock? I'm just curious. Anyway,
I think
what-
before they were on sale, it was like 20 or $25, and they're only like 1.3, but I think they're going for like 16 or 18. And some of them are infused, some of them aren't. The one that we have
Okay.
in particular is London pound cake. I think it's just flour. To be honest, I am getting them for free because my wife is a purchaser and she gets stuff to decide whether or not she wants to bring it on their menu and things like that. But we have smoked another one of these and
So
they
you
actually
liked
burned
it?
pretty good. Yeah, it was decent. As far as pre-rolls go, I'm not usually a huge fan. I typically tend to smoke on them just because it's convenient for the show, not having to like rip a bong and things like that, which is my typical thing to do, and takes a lot longer than puffing on a joint. But yeah, the other thing that Doc before we were talking a little bit about was the like using other names, because this cross joint brand is called High Mind, and they got sued or attacked by an Einstein brand that they used to be called Heinstein, and they used like a cartoon Einstein face, and the Einstein Association of America or whatever went after this brand, and they're like, hey, you got to change your name and like get rid of that logo. So they did, to avoid more legal troubles. But it kind of harkened back to like GG4 being original glue or whatever, and cookies and all these other things. And it's just so common. Skittles recently getting busted kind of for the same
We didn't
issues.
have like some agreed upon conventions for strain names, because a lot of strain names like are just not very good too, or things that you're kind of embarrassed to talk about, or are just blatantly off-putting, or are trademark disputes, or all sorts of like issues. I mean, I understand a good name is a really powerful marketing strategy, so I get that. But yeah, I've often thought about that. I haven't named any cannabis strains myself, though, so I'm not fully aware of all the pressures that sort of bear upon an individual in such a situation.
I think we can do
I've
better
read-
than Girl Scout crack, like one that you've mentioned in the
Yeah.
past.
Yeah,
That's what I'm talking about.
I have
Even
to
if
agree.
even if you just called that, I was talking about that one this morning on Smart and Crispy Show, I think. Even if you just called that green cookies, because it's green crack and Girl Scout cookies.
So
like,
much better. Yeah.
it's so much better to call it green cookies than Girl Scout crack. I mean, I have a little niece that's in the Girl Scouts, and I'm like, I'm like,
I feel bad. It's very
Alright.
cringy. It's very cringy
It's
to
very
say it. I
cringy.
feel like I have to
The
admit.
the fucking name
There's-
Green Crack isn't even the name of the strain. It was called Kush. The breeder who bred it called it Kush, but Snoop Dogg
All
and
right,
his
not to put you on
infinite
the
wisdom
spot, Doc,
called
but
it green
what plant
crack.
are you growing for the autoflower challenge?
Yeah.
thanks. Thanks, Tao. I appreciate that, Tao. I made the fatal error of trying to say, hey guys, it might not be the best idea to grow this strain because of the name. And of course, everybody jumped on that like the hottest bandwagon ever. So this
Particularly
is,
for the size matters autoflower
yeah, this is
challenge.
the Size Matters Autoflower Challenge. And we have a sponsor who wants to give us some seeds. And so a bunch of us are going to be growing those seeds, and we're looking through the strain names. And then I wrote to him and I'm like, well, which one of these, because, a bunch of us are trying to grow the biggest auto, like which one would be the biggest auto? And they hit us back with like 3 or 4 names. And one of the names was Sticky Dicky. All right. And so I write to our little chat group. I'm like, I don't think I'm going to choose Sticky Dicky because it just doesn't sound right to try to grow the biggest Sticky Dicky. Right.
Hmm.
So
Or
at
the
that
smallest.
point, now everybody wants to grow Sticky Dicky. Everybody's like, oh, that's the one. That's what I'm going to have to grow then. I mean, so yeah, that now we're all gone. I mean, I guess
Perverse incentives.
I've got the smallest Sticky Dicky of them all.
I know, like who's got the
that's
biggest?
kind of the reason why I want.
Really, that's what we're doing. I mean, so this is another strain name sort of disaster that I find myself in right now.
Hire AC/DC to do the song for you.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah,
I think that's a perfect example of why this should still be a freedom of strain names. I personally don't like a lot of the strain names, but at the same time, I think the freedom of the strain name should be out there. And if they get to be ridiculous or totally, out of touch with the reality, then they just, we don't have to support them. As in a free market, you've got the ability to support with your dollars. So just don't support the ones that are, just purely offensive or just not thought out. But, some people have fun with it. And, like you said, Sticky Dicky, you can have a lot of fun with that one. So
well, we're already, kind of playing with the double entendre here with the size matters grow challenge, right?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
It devolved pretty quickly. Like, okay, now we're all just trying to grow the biggest dicks. Like,
yeah, it's almost as bad as my D&D character that was Janus Broadleaf, because the storyteller didn't like Janus Big Root.
I like it.
So now it's Broadleaf, and they allowed that one. So I was like, all right.
Okay,
An alchemist, of course, a druid, right?
Yep. That sounds like a good druid name, really.
Yeah, right. From the Big Root tribe, not a fan of the Little Root tribe.
right.
Exactly.
I don't think it's a scram name, but the term donkey dick gets thrown around, I think, a little too much in the cannabis community when they're talking about big butts.
Big colas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the DGC, I was watching it earlier today. They have a sticker, like people like post things that could be a possible sticker for, I guess, either DGC or whatever. But they had a donkey with a big butt as its dick, and yeah, it was pretty funny, I must say.
It's definitely become like
to people like Tao, and that's why these names become so popular.
Well, I mean, autoflowers are like one of the most sold things, and like a handful of us aren't growing them on the regular. So the growing market is very interesting because I think there's always new people coming in, and they'll go to whatever big seed bank and get whatever sounds like the funniest or coolest name a lot of the times without doing a whole bunch of research. And I think maybe those first few grows might not go as well as expected, and then they'll look a little bit more into the breeders and find people that have been doing really good work, and then they'll see like, wow, there's some really good consistent stuff, and you can buy something that looks like this picture, and then you grow it and it looks fairly similar to it, and it smells like the description and things like that. Like Gnome Automatics is a great one. I think has tons and tons of examples of stuff like that, where as far as autoflowers, a lot of people I think aren't as consistent. Even photo periods, there's a lot of inconsistency, but in the auto market, it's getting much better. I mean, he's been part of the autoflower network for over a decade, and there's many other great people, Mephisto and Night Owl, and so many great ones out there. But it's cool to see that they're continually getting better, because even like 5-10 years ago, they were not what they are today. They're much, I mean, I would, as a big photo period smoker, say that they're discernible. So most 9 out of 10 growers would have no idea. If you just had a jar of buds on the table, so go and smoke these buds, most people aren't gonna be like, that's an autoflower. If it's grown well and it's the right particular strains.
Yeah.
I remember I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a powdery mildew resistance researcher, currently doing some good cannabis powdery mildew genetic resistance research. And during a conversation, one thing that they brought up was that with like, I don't know how we got on the topic, but I guess something about like the ridiculousness of like names like we are here. But like he said that for apple cultivars, apparently it's like there's like like not a rule that you have to follow, but like I guess from like a marketing perspective or something, it's very common to have like a 2-part name, and alliteration is really popular. So like the same letter sound for the first and the last one, or like something like for example, I don't think this is what he said, but something Frost I think he used maybe. So like like blue frost or whatever. And I think there's something to that, and it's probably more. I think it's more generalizable to other fruits and another marketing name. So maybe anyone thinking to have a good name, like think about that maybe.
I think that it really is incumbent on the breeder to maybe choose some of the better words if they want to be inspired by the strain names of before, like we talked about with green crack and Girl Scout cookies. It could be called green cookies. And there's many other examples, like there's a Power Africa and then like Black Domina, and you can think of a few different ways to make that name, and a few of them would be very offensive, or in maybe marketing towards a certain group. You could make it White Widow across to Power Africa or whatever. I think people can get to where I'm going, and you could probably offend a lot of people. Green crack across to Power Africa or whatever. So it's just like there's a lot of different ways that people could name strains like that, and some of them would be more controversial, and maybe sometimes that's what people are going for. I think So Cool thought he was controversial with like Chernobyl being like a nuclear disaster zone, which I think might offend some people.
Yeah. Although, has anyone heard
Agent Orange was the one he didn't like the most because
that was because Miss Jill, I think, had a family in Vietnam, and it was for.
But then he said, thinking back, he wished he hadn't called it that, and he would have came up with something different.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
It's only Agent Orange if they made it in the United States. Otherwise, it's sparkling defoliant.
Sparkling defoliant.
Yeah, that's a bad joke. I'm sorry. but like, yeah, that's actually a really good point, I think. That you were saying sparkling.
I mean, I haven't made a lot of strains, but when I was coming up with names, I do like. I think it's fun to. The most fun way to come up with a name is to take the lineage and somehow pay homage to the lineage, like the parents.
I like that a lot.
That's my fun. That's what I think is the most fun. If I can't figure that out, then my next best thing is to go off of the smells and the flavors of the plant, and something that at least tells you something about what it is.
Yeah.
And so that's my next go-to. Yeah, I know it's back and forth between the two, but for me, I don't know why. To me, I find it more important to know the lineage. I don't know why. But that's,
the lineages are getting so
a little bit more
now. I mean, like so many crosses and background and like different things hybridized. So I think it's much more informative to describe either the flavors or the effects.
But for me, if I know the parents of the parent plants, and I'm saying I know those plants, like I'm familiar with those plants, it tells me what I can expect with the offspring usually. And I just love.
I guess
to me, I get I get a smile, I get a tickle. It's fun to me to smoke something and be like, all right, I'm gonna look back in the lineage and see if there's, for example, Space Queen in this, because I know I taste it. So I think it's fun to go back and look and find, oh hell yeah, there it is. You know what I mean? And
that's like the Judge I'm smoking right now. I smelled it the first time. I was like, there's got to be Chem Dog in this, and I looked it up, not knowing that there was. It was like either Chem like Pheno or just a Chem Cross or whatever it was. But sometimes you come across those things that smell like that. I haven't named the strain. It was gifted to me from my buddy Doja DNA. But Velvet Punch is a purple punch crossed to his Cookie 7. But in Cookie 7, there's a Black Velvet Kush is one of the parents. So it's Thin Mint Girl Scout Cookie across the Black Velvet Kush, which is Mexican Sativa across the Chem 4 across the OG Kush. So like Doc said, a lot of the lineages are kind of scrambled, but
yeah, everything's in everything, it seems like anymore, right?
Well, my wife smelling the Velvet Punch said it smelled a lot like Granddaddy Purple, which is one of the parents of Purple Punch, which is the mother of the plant, which it would make sense. To me, it is a lot reminiscent of Purple Punch, but there's also some cookie-esque traits and other like OG, like very gassy-ish traits.
See,
so
any of those things, and if you can come up with a name that sort of combines it like Velvet Punch does, I think that harkens to some of the experience of smoking it and what the flavors you might get from that, and it describes the lineage and everything. Either of those are fine. I think just what a lot of breeders are trying to do is think primarily about marketing when they come up with strain names, and less about either lineages or describing the effects, but just like what's catchy and what's going to sound good. And I don't know. I guess that's maybe the most important from the breeder's perspective, or from the sort of like the becoming a successful breeder, making a living off of it perspective. but not maybe the most important for what we'd like to know about the strains.
I agree with that. I think that's pretty much spot on. That like it's kind of an unfortunate truth that like you got to make the name good too. Like you could make the best book or a really nice cool book, but if you call it like I know something really boring, like
I don't know, man. There's strain names. I think if it's dank, people are gonna talk about it. I don't care what the G13. How boring is that name?
I agree. Also, I think
Donnie
we should
Burger
just
is kind
go
of a
to
random
number
name.
letter combinations. That'd be fine with me.
The thing that I really dislike is when it's like, this is banana, whatever, and then you grow it and it smells nothing like banana. That's always a
Yeah.
bummer. Or
Yeah, I just like that too a lot.
there was one other thing that I could think of that is kind of a letdown when, oh, sorry, my cat is attacking my headphones. My producer over here.
yeah, I hate it when the execs get involved.
Anyways,
Always silence good content. Look at this.
yeah, indeed. I don't know. I think that this is going to continue to be a thing. If you're out there breeding or creating seeds, yeah, I would try
But-
to.
So-
I remember my
careful.
thought. It was like if it's like a Granddaddy Purple, and for a while it was very purple when it first came out, and then they lost some of the parent genetics, and then they re-released it, and like 80 or 90% of the grows I saw of Granddaddy Purple were green plants. So this is kind of like that's a little bit of a letdown.
Yeah.
Oh, I could see
But
that.
there-
Yeah.
There's
They've got it
definitely
better
something
now
to
from
a
what I see.
name, because them Ocean Grown Boys were had that ninja fruit, and everybody was talking about the ninja fruit. But everybody who grew the ninja fruit, who also grew out a strain they did called Bewitched, all said the Bewitched was way better than the ninja fruit. But because like just the name ninja fruit got around and it was on people's lips and everybody was talking about ninja fruit, it seemed to be the most popular strain. Maybe it was just my perception of how it all happened, but like, yeah, I think there is something to a name. And once it gets a good reputation, yeah.
Yeah.
I saw a Joe Biden AI speech meme going around where he describes some weed that he's smoking as, and I put it in the chat, Nuclear Sour Necromancer Kush, which honestly is a great name.
That's
Or,
hilarious.
Nefarious Evil Sorcerer Moongrass.
I
don't
normally
know.
just hear him calling it Zaza.
Yeah,
for the
it's
memes.
for the
Well,
memes.
Zaza's
Yeah, I
a
mean,
real strain.
Now, yeah,
Yeah.
Zaza is a short for exotic, like, and they used za for pizza. Back in the day, some people would call
za.
pizza za, but
Yeah.
exotic was short for, or za was short for exotic, and now it's become Zaza. It's like in the
Exactly.
rap scene for sure.
Yeah,
Is a
exotic's
very, very commonly
California
used.
thing still, I think.
Is it? I didn't know where it came from.
I think it's because I don't know. Every time people hit me up in my DMs, if they're from California, they start hit me with exotic.
It sounds Hollywood.
I'm like, I'm sorry, around these parts, exotics is what you call mids to sell it. I don't know what that shit is. It's not something you want.
Mids and Mylars usually. It's usually by the broker dealer types, and then they're just pushing whatever Shark Lotto, Gelati. Like I think kind of Doc might have been referring to earlier with some of the breeders. They're just chasing the hype strain with. It was desserts for a little while. It was like cookies, cakes, and then gelatos and all these other biscottis, and then it was combos of all that stuff, and then it became sweeter desserts, and it's an ever evolving thing. Then it circles back. It's like everybody will hate a strain for a while, and then it becomes awesome again. It's kind of a interesting cycle that we all go through. Fruit strains are in, and then they're out, and then their gas is like all the rage, and then it just there's
think it's
certainly hype
lime.
cycles.
I'm calling lime this year. That's what I'm seeing.
Well, what I'm
Brandon's been on
having
the line.
right, what I'm having right now is they called it this is a concentrate, it's a light batter, a bubble double dream, which is a J1 and diamond dust cross, which good viewers will note is important. Diamond dust is important for making a permanency spell. So it's a 5th level concentrate. No, but anyone know about those two lineages, J1 and diamond dust?
J1
Those
is
ring
Jack
any bears?
Herrera Skunk #1. That's actually a
Okay.
relatively famous locally in San Diego. There's a crew, a guy I would call my mentor. his buddies are the ones who bred it. If you look around on the internet, there's no known breeder. I'm pretty sure I know the guy who's the breeder, but he doesn't want any kind of credit like that. So I don't know about the diamond dust though. I think that might be like referring to when they take THC diamonds and then like crush them up and mix it into a concentrate. But there might be a strain out there called diamond dust as well that I'm not aware
I
of.
think it is here. Yeah. So maybe they're an avid D&D player. I don't know.
I'd have to hit the Googles for that.
So Matthew, I have to ask, you brought up D&D a couple times now. Have you played, have you switched to Pathfinder yet? Or are you hardcore sticking with D&D after all that?
I haven't played with I am aware what you prefer. And I haven't really played a good game with quality friends and players in a while. Actually, it's kind of a bit of a letdown. I did it for probably a decade. Basically, I practically acted, practically played a role for a character for a long while, and not always the same campaign. But I like Pathfinder. I am a 3.5 traditionalist. I know how. I mean, like I know it like that. But yeah, I mean, Wizards of the Coast has been for a long time a sort of light on the creative community, and I think it's gotten to the point, much like it has with Velcro, like we just discussed. It is no longer their animal. It is no longer their baby anymore. It is now you can't. It's a game where people have an imaginary world and a shared hallucination with a little bit of math. So you kind of can't take that away from people, unfortunately. So they should have thought about that, I think.
Said.
I've got the answer on the diamond dust for you, Matthew. It's a sativa dominant hybrid that is a cross of Sour Bubble, shout out to Bog, and Double Dream, bred by Clade 9 Genetics.
Double Dream, I wonder.
Well, that explains the name then, right? Double Bubble.
That does.
There you go. Well, Matthew, that reminds me, I wanted to tell you that me and my buddy Big Pone, we're going to start a side project of a show we're going to be calling Dungeons and Dank, and we're going to do the first season with live people, and if it goes well, we're going to try to do remote. So I'll know who to reach out to if we need some more remote people. Maybe we can get you in on a couple.
I have an open schedule for such a thing. It would be nice. Don't have anyone pick a wizard.
I will.
I like to play a wizard.
Perfect. I'm looking at.
We'll see.
I'm looking right now. I'm trying to decide between the ranger or the cleric. I got to go deeper in before I decide, because I really want to play a dwarf class, but I don't know.
Are you a min-maxer?
No.
Not really, right?
Not
Well, it doesn't
really,
matter then.
We have a
that's what I'm
question
saying.
from Stangman for you, Zenthal. If you would like, they're asking, do you like using Dr. Zyme's Eliminator for mites or something better for week 5 flower in the garden, 5x5 tent? And for those who are avid watchers and listeners of the Cheap Home Grow podcast and Growing with My Fellow Growers, you'll probably remember Stangman from last week, who showed their garden off and thought that they had no pests, but we were all saying this looks like pest damage. And I think some people even specifically said spider mites. And I saw earlier in the chat that they said, I do have spider mites. So, but that being said, Zenthal, that question to you. Do you like Dr. Zyme's?
That's too bad, but it makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I felt like, I actually didn't make the connection. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, Jack. So yeah, it's actually not my preference. Earlier, Stangman asked me if it would work, and I said, I think it could work if you apply it, and you should be sure to, if you're going to apply anything, apply it and then see what happens afterwards, right? And then use that information to see whether you need another spray or not. But to be honest, I forgot that we're dealing with week 5 flowers, so I don't. I think that'd be better to use something like the persimmon mites that I like to talk about. But it's really a question. But then once you enter that topic, it's a question of, well, how much are you seeing? How bad is it?
You remember what the mites looked like from last week, Matthew?
A little bit.
I can send the link out and they can jump back in.
From that, no webbing, and no visible mites at that point. But just I thought it looked pretty early stippling. Signs of leaf speckling from spider mites.
Yeah, the plants looked gorgeous, despite like any sort of like invasion. So, and that's why we were so like trepidatious, right? Like, I don't really think. I mean, it looks like pests, but
We
he
thought
said
it
he didn't
was
see
best, yeah,
anything.
but he didn't
Yeah,
add him at that point. I agree with your thought about Persimolis. I'd hit him pretty hard with Persimolis probably, but I wouldn't want to spray.
I'll follow
yeah,
that up
because
with
those were
even in
nice.
veg.
Those are nice nugs.
I've tried using Dr. Zyme's eliminator. I had a free sample. I got some clones from somebody who, claimed they were clean. I obviously did not take their word on that, and I thankfully isolated them. And within, a week or so, I noticed that they had a pretty large amount of spider mites on them. And I started aggressively treating them with the Dr. Zyme's eliminator, even to the point where I completely soaked the entire clones in a bucket with a pretty heavy solution of eliminator. And the spider mites just thrived and continued to grow. And they were webbing out the plants by like 2 weeks and like a day. And so I changed up my approach. I ended up ditching the clones. I fought them off just to see, but these were like maybe some super spider mites. They were from a clone nursery. And I think that he tried a whole bunch of different stuff and they kind of got resistant maybe to a bunch of different stuff because pretty much everything I tried was less effective than it had been in the past. And I have been very pleasantly surprised with how well properly implemented, good beneficials can be effective. So the sprays can definitely be not so fun, especially late in flower, if you can avoid them for something that might be much more effective.
How many Persimolis would you hit him with? I think he's in a 5x5, right? Can somebody correct me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
In a 5x5?
yep, 5x5 for sure.
He's
And-
got exhaust running through there, but I think the Persimolis can not get pulled out with the exhaust. So how much would you hit him with?
Yeah, it's considering that also they've had like a week head start, right? And it might be a week before he gets what he wants. I might hit him with like anywhere between like 1,000 and maybe two. If you want to be really fastidious, you might even go up to
1,000 mites?
3. Yeah,
Or
1 to
3,000
2,000 might. Yeah,
So-
1 to 3,000
So
mites.
4,000
I'd
mites
say.
is where
So,
I
yeah,
So
at least 6,000 mites.
6,000 mites. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, because they're like you said, there were no webbing. I just want to let's go over that for the chat too, and just for edification. Like we saw no webbing, a little bit of stippling. It was hard to see, admittedly. So we should be acknowledging that. But
He needs to know what Persimolis are. He's asking if it's a dust.
oh, okay, yeah. So
Not a dust.
Persimolis are these small red mites that you can get from various biocontrol companies. I guarantee you that you'll find a really good brand just by looking them up. Copper's a really popular one, Beneficial Insectary, BioBest, BioLine.
I hate to be.
Oh,
Can you just spell it out for people out there because when they hear
Oh,
Persimolis,
yeah.
they might misspell it or not
I think they
understand
got
what we're saying.
I think Smart put the correct spelling, and I saw the chat going by there. But yeah, so these are more mites. You're gonna send in more mites to kill the bad mites. You're gonna have like the good mites versus the bad mites going on in your time.
It's
yeah,
one of the coolest
exactly.
things in IPM.
Good thing
I've seen it
is-
work. I've literally watched it. Like the first time I ever fought off mites, it was predator spider mites. My barber got him. I've talked about this in the past in flower, and I would never went over before in the veg, and he flipped flower before I got there, and I didn't realize that he had an infection of spider mites, or else I would have told him not to flip. But we were fighting him off, and he used Lost Coast plant therapy on like barbecue skewers that he was using to remove. They had webbed up his buds. It's to that point, and he ended up
Yeah.
putting in a bunch of Persimolis and other, I think he used Californicus as well, but overwhelmed them with a huge amount of that so that they just ate every single last one of them and either evacuate or die off themselves. And he actually made it through harvest and got a successful harvest. 3 out of 4 plants, I would say you wouldn't even be able to tell. The 4th plant was not the best tasting, but the other 3, nobody even knew. So it was impressive to see how well the predator mites can work.
It's really great that
Persimolis.
you're getting them in at this point right here because they're not webbing yet. They're not getting into a big population. They have the capacity, those spider mites, to really hockey stick. But getting these Persimolis in there, you're going to be able to see the difference, and it's really helpful if you're able to look at the underside of the leaves, which is where I'm assuming that they typically are for you, because they are for others. You'll see that the spider mites tend to be kind of like, it can range, but it can be like a cream to a greenish color. Sometimes they are also a reddish or an orangish color with like black spots on their back, usually 2, but sometimes a little bit more. And the Persimilus mites will be like crimson red, and they'll be moving around a lot unless they've come across something to eat, like a spider mite egg. What's really great about them is that they can pierce through the silk, they can tear it apart. They've evolved to only eat the spider mites that you have, which is probably Tetronychus urticae. I saw somebody else put in the chat, which is great knowledge there. Yeah.
Which is also nice for somebody like Stegman who hasn't used biocontrols before. Like the Persimilus mites aren't going to like, attack you in your bedroom or something. I mean,
yeah,
a lot of people get scared about like introducing even more bugs into their like sort of bug situation. But yeah, the Persimilus mites will only eat spider mites. And when they run out of spider mites because they've like killed them all, they'll die. And then you won't have any mites anymore. So that's sort of the goal.
It's a beautiful
really,
cycle when it works. And just
it really wraps it up.
Explain something that Matthew said that people might not be familiar with. The term hockey sticking, I think he's referring to the population where it starts off low and slow, but then it has an exponential growth and it rips up like the shape of a hockey stick. And so the chart or pattern of like, if you plot it out, like there's 100 today, 150, 100, 80, 200, 300 or whatever. And then it gets like 1,000, 2,000, 10,000, 100,000. It just rips up really quickly. And something like heat, I would estimate, would be something that might create something like that to happen. I think that they're more, the fecundity, I think Matthew would say, is higher when there's warmer temperatures and the proper climate to a point. Obviously, if it gets too hot, then they end up dying off. But in your grow, estimating about this time of year, knowing roughly where people are in the States, a lot of people I think are experiencing a little bit of colder weather. There is a little bit of heat going on as well, but I think if it's cooler, that's actually working to your benefit. And if it gets hot and humid again, then you might want to really look out because they can, the populations can boom relatively quick, and you want to get those predators in there sooner rather than later. So like overnighting or getting them in person at a garden center, if you have that available to you, would be better options than like waiting a week to get them in there.
Yeah, everything that Jack has said is very helpful information. And yeah, it's true. It's basically like you can kind of assume that like one female spider mite can make like maybe 60 to 100 eggs in its lifespan as an adult. Depends on a lot of factors, but yeah, like let's say that's an average or like maybe a little bit above average. So one of them can make that. If you have a colony of 10, and assume a mortality rate of like, I don't know, 10%, 20%. And you're still getting a ton of mites potentially like every single week or every single day. Less so, of course, per day. But yeah, like that population can ramp up. Don't be afraid also if you want. Hell, like if you find that you have, for whatever reason, like you might have like a little hot spot that's kind of like where you're seeing like the bulk of the spider mites and there's not very many and they're like on like foliar leaves, just chop those off. If you want, you could just cut those off, put them in a bag and stomp on it or seal it up and put it in your trash. Make sure that you're good about it.
A verifiable way to kill spider mites?
Freezer. That's the best.
It does work.
Pop that little bag in the freezer.
Oh yeah, freezer's way better. Freezer's probably
100% death in 24 hours. Stomping, I think you probably get like 80, 90%, depending on how aggressively you stomp and for how long.
Well,
how
if
well
you seal
the
it,
bag.
yeah. Well, you'll rip it up if you stomp it. Don't do this. I mean, I have friends who would. I had greenhouse friends who would turn it into a Mexican hat dance. They just like celebrate. They'd be like, "You're gone."
I'm surprised Spartan didn't go with his traditional light it on fire, but I think that the freezer is a more logical approach there.
Well,
honestly, it's a really good
the
choice.
reason I would say it is because for identification purposes, because once you freeze them, they don't move anymore, and you can get really close and get a good picture, and then send it to your buddy, Mackie Gates, and he'll be like, "This is."
Send the frozen mites to your buddy, or just send the picture to your buddy.
Well, I usually just do the picture, but I'm sure the actual
send the picture to your buddy. Send the mites to your enemy.
King
Solomon it.
I will say even like dead bugs don't get bothered at like the agricultural checkpoints. I've seen enough of these like shows where that people are like trying to bring in drugs or whatever or food, and then it gets popped because they don't want to bring in ag from other places that is unregistered because it might bring in like one of those a spotted lanternfly or something, for example, that could devastate a whole entire crop. So they check for live insects on ag crops that are coming in. And if they're dead, they actually just like report it and kind of like have to let it go through. In a lot of the cases that I've seen, at least, where they'll say like they'll double check the rest of it to make sure that there's no living insects in there. But a dead bug is actually like less of a obviously agricultural risk than a living one. So it's interesting that I've seen that firsthand.
Bugs, though. I'm wondering if we could reanimate them later.
Hey, talking about reanimation on the right
they're
day.
doing that with dinos. Yeah. Or mammoth meat, was it? Mammoth meat? Yeah.
Yeah, the
Mammoth meatball.
Well, I'm just talking about like, have you ever had like pizza and you leave it out and it gets like a bunch of ants on there and you don't really realize ants on there. So you like stick it in the refrigerator and then later you pull it out and like the ants are all like slow, but like they're coming back to life as the pizza gets warmer again. I'm just sort of imagining something like that. No, nobody else.
Well,
Yeah,
I'll say this: the person who invented the microwave
Oh.
reanimated a hamster, a frozen fucking hamster. That was how they
What?
figured, like one of the first microwave ever created. You can go Google this shit up, look it up. Historic fact: they reanimated a hamster from frozen, and that was
Oh.
how they ended up learning that they could heat up meat and foods and other things with it, because it was like an exposed, however, microwave device. It was basically just
Don't put your
wires.
hamsters in the microwave, people. Please.
Don't do that.
You're listening to this.
Or
Don't-
Don't do this.
don't put
But look up the history of it. It's
animals
crazy.
in the microwave. It's not good for them.
Well, how about we start? Don't put them in the freezer to begin with, and then put them in.
Yeah,
the
that's
microwave.
true. But I had no idea
Yeah.
that you'd have to be really careful on the time there, Jack, to like defrost without, cooking.
Yeah, it was a
That's
low heat.
amazing.
It was a low power because it was one of the very first ones, and they didn't even. I think they were. It's an interesting story. I don't have it all 100% memorized, but it's worth looking into. There's a lot of
Wow.
weird stuff with history, like pagan traditions that are copied by large religious groups, like the whole Easter
Happy
egg,
How
Easter.
topical.
fertility, and things like that. It's interesting. There's a pagan holiday that comes right before Easter that celebrates fertility, that talks about eggs and things like that. So it's interesting to see the traditions that are adopted from one religion or thing like that to another throughout history. And then we kind of forget it, like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is just a marketing ploy. Like a lot of people really love it today. It's a great story.
Like
But-
Santa Claus and the Coca-Cola. That was more obvious, I guess. But
Yeah. I mean, there's tons and tons of cases where over time we just kind of forget about the history of it and it becomes a cultural staple of sorts.
I won't put this point too much, but since we're doing a bit of nerd culture, I was a little bit before my time, but like the Transformers, right? Like the robots in disguise, right? The whole TV show that a lot of people who grew up in the 80s like found very attractive as children. That was just a that was what that was. That was just like an ad campaign.
All those cartoons we used to
All
watch.
those
and pretty much
cartoons.
still do,
Pokemon,
still do watch. They're all just
Pokemon,
about
right?
selling toys. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're just
So it's
30-minute
like-
commercials for toys.
Doesn't that make you feel like really gross? When I think about it, it does. It's like I feel like it.
Yeah.
Not as gross as like when you find out advanced nutrients, profit margins and how they advertise to the cannabis community with basically like half naked women and things like that. So
Yeah.
I think that there's worse things still happening currently that I won't support.
It doesn't make me feel gross. I look back at it and it makes me feel smart because I don't fall for that kind of thing, or I hope I don't fall for that kind of thing anymore. So I look back at my past mistakes and I try to grow from them a little bit.
Yeah.
Now everybody calls me crazy when I say I barely go to the grocery store for anything. You know what I mean?
Nah, but you're right. I mean, like to me, it feels a lot like it feels like exposed in the same way that like marketing to children like cigarettes and things. I know that might be a little bit.
I think a Transformer toy is a little bit less dangerous to children than cigarettes.
No,
are.
but employing the psychological trappings, like for example, Pokemon got in trouble in Generation 1 when the red and blue versions came out because there's like you could go into a gambling store and like gamble fake coins, and like nowadays video games and stuff use that all the time, and I just feel like it's not great for our psyche developing like children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I won't.
Hey, if anything,
contest
that
those
gambling
points,
taught
but-
me gambling was terrible because you lose so many fucking coins playing those
Yeah,
games and you
at
waste
least you
so much
learned in a
time
safe space. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a point
with
to be made
artificial
for that.
currency.
I'm worried about the loosening of restrictions on gambling now. I mean, we're changing a lot of our values about some of those things too.
Yeah, it's become more commonplace, I think, in every state, partially because, like any big business that becomes successful, they use their money to start lobbying in states that don't have gambling legalized, and then they make it, oh, you can gamble on your phone, and
and it's different when they're like the gambling companies are taking out TV ads and stuff, as opposed to, you know, like you had to go hunt down like a shady ass bookie and place a bet. Like, I don't know, it's a different world, I guess. But that is something that's very addictive too.
I see it. Yeah. There was people that were getting money from gambling sites, like influencers that were like video game players that, oh, now we're going to go play on this website, and they get basically staked by the website to come and win a bunch of money or lose a bunch of money, whatever it is, but just to play. And then so people know about the platform, and that people will sign up with their little coupon code or whatever it is to get $100 free if you enter $100 or whatever the fuck it is. So there's a lot of type of marketing like that. But I want to take a second to welcome in Noah, the grower, who jumped in just a few moments ago.
How's it going, everybody? I got back a little bit early from the Easter party at my parents' house, so I figured I'd jump in, and I'm listening to you guys' conversation here. Another thing that happened is back in the day, I used to be a really big, before they called it Black Monday, big online poker player. I actually did really well at it, but they had a lot of that same stuff. Guys would get, they'd get sponsored and they'd get free. And man, online poker is very, very addicting. And I actually quit playing it just because, man, it got so hard because people had like algorithms and things that made it just really hard. And I have a good buddy who makes really good money from Seattle who literally had to like have the site like shut him off because he was doing too much online gambling. I think he lost like, 10 grand in like a few months. Like, so all that gambling can be very addicting. You gotta be careful with that.
And there's shady stuff with online. I never trusted.
Like growing cannabis.
Yeah.
There's like a thing called God Mode. The guy who was the ethics person for FTX, he worked at a gambling site previously, and he was fined for having what was called God Mode on, where he would play against his competition, but he could see all the people's cards. So he knew what your hand was. So he basically would never lose because he would always, fold.
It's a bit of an advantage in poker, knowing what everybody's cards are.
Dude, I don't even trust the computerized
machines. Slots.
The slots, right?
I've always been skeptical.
It's online or computerized.
Even the mechanical ones can be rigged.
It is.
I know a guy who knew how to rig them when I was a kid.
Yeah. But it is
rigged. Anyway. It is rigged though, like right? Like it is
it
is a randomizer algorithm
and whatnot. Yeah. But have you guys seen
there's supposed to be a percent that it pays out though, and they can make it go even lower than that.
They get a script for the NFL games. You guys hear this stories?
Yes, I have.
Believe that. I don't think I can believe that. But
no, I don't either. I'm a huge NFL fan.
There'd be too many people to keep quiet, I think.
It would be too hard to keep that quiet as well as actually make it happen. You know what I mean?
It was easier to do that when there were fewer gamblers than when there are more gamblers, probly. In certain cases. There's been point shaving scandals in almost every sport. I think it's a little. I also
pay off a few refs,
probably some of that going on.
For sure. There's a few good documentaries. Bad Sport has an episode about this guy Headache who played in college at Arizona, and then there's a few about Boston. These guys basically were mobsters that were threatening people's lives. Hey, you like your legs? Well, do you want a broken leg?
Sure, they win by a certain amount, otherwise you won't have legs next week. And they made it happen. So
well, and this dude Headache, he had a 12-point spread, but didn't know it. The guy that was making the money off him was saying, "Hey, you have a 6-point spread, so you can only win by 6." And he won by 6 the very first game, and so like they had a pretty long. Good streak. There's a great documentary, Bad Sport, that highlights that.
So even that just like kind of like don't gamble is what I'm saying, because
don't gamble.
Grow cannabis. So that was my point.
Grow cannabis, spend time with your loved ones and family.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I just want to follow up on the Spider-Mite thing. So Staying is saying they're going to order tonight stat. I'm really happy to hear it. I also just wanted to, since there was a question that they had earlier, I just wanted to say that just so that for like the life cycles. So like spider mites have a life cycle like in optimal conditions right around like a month or so, maybe a little more, a little less. And but it doesn't take them that long to get to adulthood. Maybe it takes them like 1 to 2 weeks. So like their full adulthood, half of it is as like an immature, and the rest, and then they have like a whole other month as like an adult. So I didn't articulate that very well. So they live a little bit more than that. So
He's probably a month from harvest. Anything different to do in that kind of context? I mean, I'm just thinking hit him with Persimmilus, but is it gonna matter much? And then I guess the other side is what do you do with the space at the end of the harvest to make sure that you've totally nuked them?
Yeah,
Can I
and so
jump in with one tip? There's one tip
Yeah,
that
please.
I love that I didn't know about until, fairly recently, but where did I get Arbico Organics sells these, and I'm sure whoever else you order from also sells these, but they're little, I think Arbico sells them for $1 a box, but they're just a little cardboard box that opens up and has a hook on it so you can hook it to your branch. Because if you get persimmons are usually live, and a lot of times you'll get them in one big container that you have to pour, and a lot of times sprinkle over your plant. Well, if you do that in flower, it's going to stick to everything. So get you those little boxes and just pour into the box, and they'll come crawling out of that box, and hang that box in the middle of your plant somewhere.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So a lot of these Persimmilus are going to come with a filler, and so you don't want to put that filler on your bud. I'm so remiss that I didn't consider that contextual point. Do what Spartan says, put them into like a red like solo cup or a box or some sort of like little thing you can nestle or hang onto the branches. And you want to do it like to the heart of the plant if you can, so that like they can everywhere that the box is touching, is going to be an egress point for them to get out onto the branches. And you're going to want to do that for all the plants. And I also want to say that one of the benefits, like Dr. Coco really well brought up, is that at harvest, so these spider mites, they have to eat living plant tissue. They can't subsist on dead plant tissue. So as soon as you harvest, none of that plant material is going to be suitable for them to eat once it's dried. So they will die anyways in that way. Most of the damage that they're going to do is going to be to the foliage anyways. And if you do hit them with this Persimmilus, I think it's very doubtful that they're going to become like a real massive problem up in the flower. So as far as like post-harvest and all that sort of stuff, if there's no plant food for them in the tent, then they're going to die. And the real question just becomes like, kind of like, how do you think they got in there? Like, could they have gotten there from a house plant? Do you have any house plants inside? Do you have plants, in your yard, in your front yard and backyard, or something that's touching from the neighbors? Maybe they got in or around there, because spider mites feed on a bunch of different plants. So your real challenge will just be making sure that you have nothing living that they can subsist on in or near your grow space, mostly inside your house.
Yeah, it's always a challenge to figure out where they even came from in the first place. Like, how did they get there? Did you walk past something? Did you go to Home Depot where they've got a bunch of plants, and not to Lowe's has it too, any big box store or garden center? It could be on products, in products. I know people get all sorts of things from bringing home, even just like peat, which is pretty inert. They've talked often about having like fungus gnats and things like that. A lot of these pallets sit outside. It might rain, they get damp, and then things like fungus gnats get in there. But yeah, pallets next to other pallets that are infested with things like that. And figuring out where the spider mites came from in the first place. Like, were these clones that they got from somebody and didn't notice maybe in veg, and now they're realizing it in flower? That's what happened to my barber. It could have came in on your clothing. It could have.
It says it's a houseplant in the chat.
Oh, okay, yeah. So wait,
did you get rid of the houseplant?
Yeah, I would get
Yes,
rid of
it
the
was a
houseplant. Yeah. Okay. Cool. See, there you go. They're exactly right in the wild.
Get rid of the houseplant. Check all your other houseplants. Make sure there's not sort of like a banker plant for it to the spider mites.
They're being harbored there, essentially.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, and if you really have to keep a houseplant, maybe not in this particular scenario, but for people who are, who may or may not encounter this problem, put a little Persimmilus on them too. Yeah, but exactly. If you want to be super serious, like, no pet plants. The amount of times I've worked at a commercial grow where especially it's always the owner who's all like, he's like, who brings in some violets or something, or you get the fact that like a cultivation manager, after years of doing it, like becomes like interested in that kind of horticultural stuff in general, maybe gets a yard, and then they bring some plants into their cultivation space to hang out and grow really good since he has a little extra space. Is a lot, and it's a big problem. I see it less in cannabis, but yeah, just
Oh, I see
Be
home
aware.
growers doing that sometimes, bringing outdoor plants into their grow tents and growing them with their cannabis plants for like during the frost or something like this. And it's like,
Good point.
It does happen.
it
You got to
happens.
be careful of that for sure. And we get the temptation. People are plant lovers, not just cannabis. They love growing other things, and they see how spectacular they can get their cannabis to grow in some of the environments that they've created. And especially like in a veg space where you're like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. I've got this extra room over here, blah, blah, blah. But the veg is kind of the start of the flow of the river going through your cultivation process, especially for someone who keeps clones and keeps going through and through. You really got to keep that veg and clone area as clean as possible, and avoiding bringing pests or pathogens in there is going to prevent them going downstream to the flower room later on. So it's
I do work with
battle.
growers also that start their veggies in their tent, like from seeds though. And that's a lot safer than bringing in like, you know, a flat of plants that you bought at Home Depot or something. and putting
Yes.
your flower.
Those will have bugs, like very likely. Despite
Yeah.
that and also they might be sprayed with some other noxious BS that you really don't want. So, you know, just be careful. Just be careful. I know people who will sometimes, you know, with the good intent of like trying to like build like a pollinator garden or something, and they'll get a bunch of stuff from like Home Depot and they'll put it in their yard. And or maybe they'll attract like parasitoid wasps and all this cool stuff I talk about. But like, you know, the nectaries are actually filling up with like, you know, imidacloprid or yeah, you know, some sort of a neonicotinoid or something. And it's not great for the good guys or the bad guys. The bad guys usually can resist it. So yeah, just be careful. Just be careful. Always have a quarantine type mentality when it comes to that stuff. You'll be okay.
Dog Pound says recipe for disaster, bringing anything inside from outside. And I tend to agree with that, especially if you're not going to put it directly into a quarantine space. Watch it for a while. Be diligent about how you maybe even just treat it as if it's infected. I think that's a pretty good strategy, especially if it's like a non-flowering plant. If you could hit it with sulfur or whatever your preferred, you know, thing to knock down and take care of some issues. Sulfur is great because it not only takes care of like molds and mildews, but can kill a large number of pests. So, and it's has some small benefits to the plant in trace amounts that it would be foliered, and has, you know, lots and lots of reasons to use sulfur.
I like anything that's not expensive. I like that. Sulfur is a good one because you can get a dry bag of wettable sulfur that can, I mean, you can get a 10-pound bag or something that lasts you for years.
Just in California, I think that they're pretty heavy about regulation. If you're outdoor, you don't want to be spraying that stuff anywhere that it would get into like waterways. I think there's like pretty interesting labeling requirements and things like that. When I got some myself, I was surprised. It's like, I think it was pretty much saying don't spray it outside. But maybe in controlled setting, I would have to relook at the label. But because I thought it was a fairly common thing, I was surprised to see it so strictly labeled. But I think a lot of the times people don't necessarily follow the labeling perfectly. And not to say that I advocate for that, but that does certainly happen. I know a lot of things that are banned that are still sprayed on cannabis here in California in the unregulated market, sadly.
There was a DDT
stuff.
There was a report that some some products were being pinged for DDT and I think a derivative DDE. Did you guys hear about this?
Didn't, but that might just be pulling from the soil out there, man. Did you hear about
it was from like river. I think so. I think it might have been contamination from like a riverway or something.
Okay, yeah. I was reading this huge article about the huge, massive dump site of DDT right off the west coast there in California, and they've been some universities been tracking it, and it's growing, and it's scary, man.
Yeah, it's leaking and causing dead zones. There's some chemical company that's just hauling it off and dumping it in the channel between Catalina and Long Beach.
And now with that rain and stuff with the snow melt, it's gonna probably, they say there's gonna be a lot of problems when that snow melts in California.
Yeah.
The snow melt's actually easier to deal with. It's a slower, more regulated, you know, thing. But the actual rainfall we've had,
unless they get a big warm rain on top of the snow, it all melts at once and causes massive floods. But we'll see.
Yeah, it's I will say that we're currently experiencing difficulties already because a lot of sinkholes. I mean, we're talking like major freeways shut down on both sides in parts of San Diego for several miles because the supports. I'm like a little bit nervous going over certain bridges because I'm like, all this fucking rain. Like, I don't know how sound the, especially when you get closer to the coast, there was like bluff collapses, even before all this rain. So
Yeah.
with all of it making the ground less stable, it's interesting to, try and navigate around and then see there's a lot of these side streets that were once never really navigated by too many people are packed because they're forced to go alternative routes and, the safest ways, but we're handling it the best we can. And hopefully
And a lot of rain this year. I mean, it's been like living in Seattle.
I've never seen it like this in the past decade. It hasn't really been close. I've heard like in the 90s we had one like this, like a El Nino or something like that. But yeah, kind of intense for. Yeah, I'm from Ohio, funny enough, where we got rain like this all the time where I'm from. So I'm kind of used to it. But the place that I'm living is not set up for it. There's not storm sewers. There's not the ground and thing. It's just a different.
Yeah. No, it's exactly. The infrastructure is not prepared for it.
Oh man,
it's not used to getting this much water and really sandy soil that erodes quickly under flowing streams or any surface water. So it's been interesting, but yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and it feels like when I remember when I was in high school, we had like where I lived at the time, there was a lot of floods, just simply flooding because they just, like you said, Jack, they didn't have the infrastructure they did have storm drains and such, or at least they called them so, but they weren't adequate. Basically,
I've seen water shooting out of them because there was so much water. Like it was at the bottom of a hill where a bunch of water had gone. So there's literally like a storm drain where water was fountaining out, like spraying hard because all the pressure from all the other water was completely full and it was flowing down the street and it hit that one point and it just created like a eruption,
vortex or something.
Crazy.
Yeah,
it's bizarre.
And the roads suck now. The roads
are even worse.
Yeah, like
some areas that weren't bad before are now really fucked up.
And the industrial zones are way bad. There were some roads that I had just gotten to the point of being done with even going across these roads, and it looks like they're patching up some places finally, which is nice. But yeah, no, it's like being in Detroit.
I vote Matthew for DOT of California.
Yeah, seriously.
How's the weather on the east side? What's
go.
New York and Michigan looking like? How are you guys doing otherwise?
I'll tell you what, if I was in charge, the first thing I would do, because I still believe to this day that those stop all way signs are a Russian ploy to slow down America. Everybody stop. Right. What the heck is that about? We are losing time. Progression has stopped for everyone at those stop all way signs. That would be my first move.
So just open them up, no stop signs, like just.
Well, no.
Got it. Try to time it right.
He's making America great again by going back to traditional stops where you.
That's right. Just send
traditional
it. Just go.
And for your driving test, all you have to do is learn how to merge onto highways and merge off of highways, because that's what causes all the traffic in the world. Is people don't know how to merge. So that'll be part of your.
Here you go, Tao. You want roundabouts then? No more stop signs, roundabouts. Everybody merges.
No
roundabouts at 60 miles an hour. You mean a loop to loop?
That would be so awesome.
That would be cool.
Good mirrors and good timing,
dude. If you have a curve in the freeway here in California, just a curve, that's enough to create traffic.
People will run you over.
Yeah.
It's
people will run you into the. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You're on your stride.
No, it's fine, but it's crazy. People will run you over. It's like 8 lanes on both sides. It's 16 lanes, and we still have traffic.
Yeah. What is the topic of this show? We're supposed to be talking
about
right? We're like
just an Easter hangout. We weren't even sure if anyone was going to show up.
A wide-ranging show.
Dungeons and Dragons in the 21st century. No stop
exactly.
sign.
It was mostly IPM. Mostly IPM.
That was a lot of IPM, and the IPM stuff was all pure golden. So,
and we talked a lot about like patents and copyrights and the strain names and things like that. So we did talk about some cannabis stuff. Speaking of this restaurant, my wife just walked in. I can't even light this thing on my own to quote Pineapple Express. It's got 3 sides, so you only got 2 hands. So to light it, you need a friend or a partner. So my lovely wife, Lady Greenstock, might help me toast this up at the end of the show. So
you might even say you need 3 different spirits.
I love all the D&D references.
By the way.
No, seriously, Jack, no.
Oh, spirits, three
Easter,
spirits,
ladies
Easter
and
references.
gentlemen.
Sorry.
Oh, she can't hear me.
No, she can't. No one. Only my headphones are collecting the sound here. But yeah, we got Noah the Grower showing off his grow. If he turns his camera to the side, we'll get an even better shot here, and I'm gonna spotlight that for everybody. Cheers, Noah. I think you're mute right now, but I think you might have just unmuted yourself. Looking good over there.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Yeah. We're right here at the start of, I believe, D7, day 1 today. It's from 12-12 flip. So
Week 7, you said?
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Looks
think I'll
good.
probably go 9 weeks, you know what I mean, and assess after that. So that's usually my baseline. You know how it goes. Sometimes if it's an early finishing strain, I'll do an 8-week baseline, but I've always felt comfortable with a 9-week baseline and then go longer or whatever from there.
Yeah, accounting from flip. Most trains are usually 9 weeks in my garden from flip.
Yeah.
That's same for me roughly. I would say is a good average, and then if it's a fast finisher, it'd be closer to the 8, and if it's a longer finisher, maybe pushing 10, maybe a little longer than 10. If it goes a little bit longer than 10, though, honestly, it's hard to justify keeping it around. How's the triple burger coming along? I think it was triple burger.
Yep, that's triple burger right there. Yeah.
Can't wait for you to try that one.
Yeah. Man, the leaves are so dark. Purple.
Oh no, look at her. She's fucking happy.
Just naturally.
Those buds are nice. I like how the buds on those are like
oh yeah,
so circular.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of what I was talking about way back. And Anything Grows actually commented, like, would he be able to tell if it was HPS and LED? And the answer is honestly no. Mixed light, it's a lot harder to tell. But if you see buds growing under HPS or growing under pure LED, even like the same cut, like if he took that cut and then grew it under LED, I think you'd be able to see structural differences. And I know that like the science doesn't support that, but from what I've seen, like just the bud structure is more typically a little bit denser and more compact under HPS, I would say.
It may relate to the way they project heat or something like that. I mean, like there's other factors involved.
That's a great
For
point.
sure.
I typically will take off a few leaves that are covered, but due to the influence from Dr. Coco, I decided to just let it fly this time. I let it fly.
All right.
Yeah, straight up. And I'll try anything, man. Like I said, if it'll improve my grow 1%, I'm in for it. Let's go.
Yeah, all right.
It takes, man.
So
I've
what
been
are you thinking
surprised by
now
the bottom buds.
with more leaves? Are you seeing any differences at this point?
No, so it's almost shooting the other theory, you know what I mean, down, really. I mean, I haven't noticed any negative. I'm noticing, below some of the bottom ones aren't getting quite as much like density as they would if I had, got a little spot for it. And sometimes I'll just tuck, like I'll just kind of tuck one, like underneath here and try and expose it a little bit. But hey, I'm just, messing around. I'm always trying to get better. Yeah.
I think you end up more than making up for it elsewhere if you do have things like that. But plants look great, man, like always. So I'll be curious to see how it powers through the last couple of weeks.
I would always take that off and that off just because it's so convoluted back here. This light right here, there's 3 plants right here, and this canopy is just crammed. But
what's the climate? Any struggles with the relative humidity?
No. We got it's a little high right now.
Wow, that's not bad.
Well,
for Noah likes to keep it dry. He's like a 40-50% guy, right?
Yeah. And the light just came on, so the humidity is always a little bit more intense in the dark. You know what I mean? But
yeah, the temperature's still warming up. What's the temperature? I was looking at the humidity.
Yeah, the temperature is 67 right now. So
then that humidity will just dissipate into the heat. I mean, you don't even need to get rid of it.
It's going to warm right up and
once it warms up, the air can hold a lot more humidity. So the same amount of moisture that's in the air will be a much lower relative humidity number at like 80 than it is at 68.
Yeah, I love it. I have so much fun doing it. And this triple burger does look pretty cool. I'm very intrigued by it. I've never grown any Donny burger or anything like that. So, and isn't it funny, a plant that you've grown forever, like you just see you'll see a run of it and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe it's not as good as it was last time. And then sometimes you're like, wow, this is a lot better. There's so much variables that go into it when you're cloning. You're
Yeah.
surprised. More than you think.
Every plant, even cuttings off the same mother, every plant is a little bit different.
Yeah,
that's one of the
are.
challenges of being consistent in this particular market. Like for a brand to consistently put out great flower of the same strain over and over and over and over and over again, year after year, it's really, really tough. You're dealing with like a plant that, although, you know, it is a weed and it will grow in a ditch, whatever, growing dank is a whole different story. And like keeping the conditions ideal to optimize the cannabinoid, terpene, and whatever else production is a difficult task to do every single time, you know, 9 weeks just in flower. And that's not even talking about how veg goes. You got to make sure that the veg stays proper and avoiding pests and pathogens and things like that. And some stuff you literally can't even see. There's like cannabis cryptic virus. There's hop latent viroid that is really difficult to discern, especially if it's like your first couple times flowering it. Like if I know some people that will have something and they're like, oh, it's really good. And then it starts kind of falling off or fading out. And it might be hop latent viroid. And then they test it and sure enough it is. So sometimes you can test for it and figure it out, but it's really tough to catch some of that stuff early.
Man, I think some strains are better than others on that shit too. Because like I was saying, that one plant I have, even when it comes out, even if I mess it up one way or another, like a couple times I harvested, it was all yellowed out and this and that. But the smoke, the nugs tasted the same and were potent too. So that's like one of my reasons why I love it so much. You know,
man. And then it seems like sometimes a certain strain will just kind of hit a wall. I've noticed that because I had my platinum strain for at least 6 years. I had a cynic strain that I really loved for about 6 years. And then the buds, you just like, basically, like you said, that even the buds were not the same color, like the quality wasn't there, the yield and it was just like, man, I can't do this no more. I love it. But at one point you just got to turn it loose when it starts doing that. You know, usually I've noticed about 6+ years in is when I've been hitting the wall. So
if that's a long time to pick up potential pathogen load, you know, over time, just like generally from whatever source, it's just it. And even the, you know, somoclonal variation, I think Matthew has discussed in the past, where within the same plant, the genetics are changing where it's coming from on the plant and over time. So it's not like genetically, literally, it's not spitting out the same clone that it was 6 years ago. So it's interesting to note that you're able to see those changes and over that period of time. I'm sure like maybe tissue culture and scrubbing and cleaning, there's some ways that you could kind of clean it up or bring it back to somewhat better health. But over a 6-year period, I'm hoping that we all find better stuff. I'm hoping in every 6 years, just like our lights, just like our, you know, soil mixes, we evolve, we adapt, we improve. And so are the genetics and so are the, you know, seed vaults that we haven't popped.
I gotta push back on that because everybody, like in the past few years, everybody's like, I want that old shit that no one has anymore. You know, I am of the belief that we should be like Europe and we should have never tore down some of those stadiums. Like, we have throwaway culture every 10 years. We'll throw away that stadium and build a new one. Meanwhile, over in Europe, they have buildings and castles that are centuries old and shit. Like, if there's something
the American
really good,
one is advocating for us to be like Europe.
If there's something really good, you should keep it.
You're gonna have to turn in your top hat.
Chem 91 is a great example. It still goes around, and I'm still smoking. I just talked about it at the top of the show. The Judge, one of my favorites, comes from a 1991. A 17-year-old kid popped a bag seed.
20-year-old things that stand the test of time. It's like music, but you know what? Everything eventually fades away.
I agree, but I still think that they were probably 12% THC and like nothing with
some
CBD.
of those,
Some of them had like crazy terpenes that I do kind of agree we can't find anymore. But
I feel like we get into it. Oh, sorry, you go first.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I think weed's gotten better. I think our strains have gotten
overall.
I feel like it gets into a ship of, oh man, is it a ship of thieves? Is it ship of Theseus or ship of thieves? Thebes. Anyways,
I was thinking more rose-colored glasses, you know, nostalgia, looking back, like when we're in high school or the first time you smoke, you think, oh, that shit was amazing because like you had no tolerance at all and you had no perspective. But when you smoke every day and you're like an adult and you can afford to wake and bake if you want to and grow your own, you could smoke literally all day, every day, depending on your job.
Unfortunately, I know the first weed that I smoked was like brick weed, like imported brick weed. I mean, I know that for a fact. It got me hella high. I mean, I remember sitting on the sunroof of my buddy's car, like on this abandoned dirt road, just like super high, like crazy high. But like, I don't attribute that to like, oh man, that was really good weed. I know it was shit weed.
Yeah.
It's like,
So,
but I guess what I was trying to say is that, like, kind of like we were saying with the somoclonal variation and things like that, where like basically, like it can't help but change over time, even if you could somehow like keep it,
Yeah.
like the germplasm and all that. Like there's going to be a bunch of changes and stuff over time.
Yeah,
change.
entropy happens.
we
And then you
change.
change
Our
too.
biology
Yeah.
changes. Like you try and recreate something from your childhood. You might want to go back and like, I used to play paintball as a kid. Even if you go with the same person to the same field, it's just like you can't remake the magic happen. It was like different. You
Yeah.
were younger. It was a different part of life. You know, it's like there's sometimes some stuff just can't be recreated in that respect. But I want to give Spartan Grown a chance to get his final thoughts and shout outs in before he gets running on over to the Michigan Bros Grow Show in about 14 minutes now.
Yeah, I mean, as far as that subject, I would just, counter Tao, and we usually see eye to eye on most things, but I think that if they were so good to stand the test of time, they would still be here. And a lot of times they're not here. So, I mean, and the reason I say that is just my own
Some of
experience.
them are.
Every time I go back and try to grab
Yeah,
those
some of them.
things and grow them, it's a letdown. But sometimes you're right. Sometimes you'll find a gem. So there is hope out there, and I'll forever be a pheno hunter. So I'll go back, forward, left, right, whatever. I just want to find those gems. And I don't know. I think I'll forever be doing that. And that kind of what pushed me into just the amateur breeding stuff, was just to be able to search through more. So, but yeah,
the breeding with the pretty old. How old is that vortex?
I mean,
That's
I
not
don't know.
new.
I mean, it's definitely not new, but it's definitely not, Romulan.
It's
definitely
relatively
not.
modern. I would say Subcool just passed a couple years ago, and it was, less than a decade.
And let me point out, all the new strains are made with the old strains. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a lineage. It's
So
like
breeding that's what breeding does. They keep crossing things to find like better combinations.
Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt.
I absolutely agree with
Oh,
you there.
man.
And that was a thought I had during the conversation too, is that really they haven't gone anywhere. They're just in everything. They're kind of mixed and matched through everything. And they're, like I was alluding to earlier, when I say, sometimes I'll smoke a strain and I'll be like, oh, I got to go back because I think I can taste, XYZ in there. And then you go back in the lineage and boom, there it is. Or like something gets popular and gets used to breed like crazy, like cookies. You smoke something and they call it, whatever your favorite dessert is, and you smoke and you're like, yeah, this is just cookies. Give me something.
Right.
So
there's two things that I think have changed there, though. But the people have been taking in from like, land races and other strains, trying to breed in different traits and stuff.
Yeah,
and that's changed the gene pool that we're working with a little bit. But I should shut up and let you say goodbye.
Some of those
No,
strains
I agree
are
with you.
from
And
the
then
land race originally, though, like the stuff that made the cookies and the White Widows and all the other stuff.
Right.
And Spartan, I did just pop those Vortex F2s after long delaying. I have some of those that
That's
I'm
a
about
good
to
point. You can
take
delay
out
that
of the
too.
paper bag.
That's
They're
awesome.
germinated 2 days ago, so they're ready to be planted now.
Sweet. But yeah, I'm just gonna make this thing short. But yeah, it was awesome hanging with you guys. We'll see y'all next week. And like every week, the most important thing is just keep growing, guys. Grow at home, protect those rights, keep growing. Love y'all. See you next week.
Grower
Peace
love,
out.
Thanks, Spartan. Much love, man. I'm excited about this. I'm doing lots of subcool type gear. I guess it's considered old school nowadays, but yeah, to me it was modern cannabis. Like when I moved out to California, it was some of the hottest shit in the medical clubs, and I didn't even know who subcool was. I just knew the strains, like Jack the
What year
Ripper,
was that?
Chernobyl, mid 2000s.
Okay.
Yeah, early, like probably close to 2011. And there was a lot of his stuff that was already popular then, which is over a decade ago now, I guess. So it is technically a little bit old school, because the hype cycle does come pretty quick. There's thousands of strains out there and there's hundreds of new ones that come out every year. But I would say like there's probably, like, on my hand I can count how many of them are actually like good or make an impression that maybe will last more than that year or month or whatever it is. But it's
And
all
I'll point
really
out that
preference based too.
cookies supposedly has a Durban poison part of it. Supposedly.
If you've grown and smoked Durban and you've grown and smoked cookies, I would say that they're very, very, very extremely distantly related, because
Right,
there's
well-
the terpene profile, the plant growth, they're so different. What I think happened there is people called it F1 Durban. The cookie guys didn't know what an F1 is, like an F1 hybrid. They said like, oh, it gets you so high. It's like F1, like vroom vroom, like the race car F1 Formula One. So they thought that F1 Durban meant like it got you so high because F1 Durban. But I think that it was a Mendo Perps crossed to a Durban at the very least as like one of the parents. So if anything, it's like a quarter Durban, not 50-50, like some people speculate. There's a lot of different stories on cookies. It was a lot of bag seed stuff. So oftentimes like that in the sour, they don't even know because their stuff self-pollinated or pollinated something else in the room. And there was sometimes multiple Hermes. So it's hard for them to say exactly what created the stuff. And then other people found like the forum cut wasn't from the first cookie. It was from like a bag seed that people found in early cookies bags. So there's lots of thin mint.
Is there a
and all that
strain
other-
that's not Durban poisons that's called the Durb? Because yeah, he said it was F1 Durb. The kid
F1 Durb
actually
is
from cookie
Mendo
from-
Perps crossed
it
to
was-
Durban.
Oh, okay.
That's a strain. That
So
is
that's
a
probably so that's the strain he was talking about then.
yeah. And that's I think the misinterpretation comes from. But
Well, and in any case, Cookie still has a Durban poison, which was there, and like you could buy seeds of that in like 1996. So, yeah, it all
That's
comes
what
from those old
selection
ones,
is.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
breeders continually selecting the best from doing a pheno hunt and using that to cross with the next. And you know, through time, you actually lead to genetic improvements for the selected traits that you're looking for. So, like,
Well,
I
you
mean,
left with
that's
the
what breeding
homogeneous-
is. In the best case, is recombining the most
bottleneck
favorable things,
now.
choosing the best examples of that, and using those as the new breeding stock.
It was
The funny thing is
bottleneck, though.
Cookies
Everybody
isn't-
used the same shit, so it's all the same.
you could argue
But it
that.
changes all the time, Tao. And the fact that it's changing and we keep selecting the best examples of it and using those going forward is how evolution basically happens. It's how the strains themselves change through time, through generations. There's no way you
Although-
can stop that.
Well,
So
the best is
We need people breeding for different things is what we need.
people are
I'll say
basically
this.
breeding for
No,
different things.
you know, this is a lot like I feel like this is a lot like an argument that I sometimes have with friends when it comes to like cars and jet aircraft. And I'm going somewhere with this, which is basically that if you are chasing certain traits in, like, if you're trying to design a car that's aerodynamic, well, physics kind of is physics. And so there's only a few ways that you can do that without detracting from what you're trying to do. Lightweight, you know, aerodynamic, you know, and in
Right.
the case of the aircraft, like stealth is stealth, and the ways that you can do that are limiting. So to do all those things, that's why you get this homogenized thing, because people have a demographic or a set of traits or a goal, and it's the same because they want to capture the same customer base.
same, yeah.
Hopefully,
Well,
which is as
let's
many
look
people.
at I mean, other types of like apples, for example. Breeders are out there selecting until they develop a new apple that then is notably different than the other apples. And then they'll make clonal varieties of that and they'll release that. And that's how we have so many different varieties of apples now. If you went back in time 60, 80 years ago, they didn't have as many cool different varieties of apples. It's not that they were just like all scattered around the world being grown by different, they didn't exist. Like all those varieties of different apples have been brought into existence by rigorous breeding programs, working with extant genetics under intense selection for specific traits and then crossing them back together again. I mean,
Wasn't that after
that's
a
how
big bottlenecking though? Like we used to have, like in the 100 years ago, there were actually hundreds of apple cultivars, and then it got bred down to Granny Smith, Honeycrisp, and
Well,
the
a
big
lot
five.
of them weren't good to eat. A lot of them were only good to make meat,
Ciders and-
cider. Yeah, and that was a problem.
And apples, unless you're grafting them, won't produce big fruit. Like we're all used to apple trees that have been grafted onto a hardier rootstock so that they produce much bigger fruit. Like
Good point.
wild
Crab
apples
apple.
like that don't exist. I mean, apples are really exist the way they exist because humans have been intensely cultivating and breeding them. And every year they're a little bit different. And most people would sort of argue a little bit better because of those breeding efforts.
I would say same with cannabis. I mean,
same with cannabis. Yeah. And
yeah.
It's not like they're the same because nothing else has been introduced or whatever. It's just that rigorous selection for specific traits, chasing, specific expressions, and then crossing that back with other, varieties that you've chased specific expressions. And breeders usually do chase one thing. Like when they're selecting for something like that, they're selecting for like a specific terpene or a specific, flavor profile or a specific sugar glucose percentage in apples or something like that. And they're trying to get like the sweetest one. And then once they get the sweetest one, they'll start crossing that with the one that has this like cool flavor profile. And they get new varieties that way. And yeah, the same way as cannabis in a lot of sense. I think cannabis breeders are a little bit less organized in general than a lot of these other cultivars have been. But I think there's some breeders that are doing amazing work too.
The quality being better every single year and consistently, I think, is the one thing that reminded me of both being there. And the one thing that is kind of interesting was that is clear the cannabis is like, due to human cultivation, is the fact that it's so often seedless when it's presented to people now, and so often now even concentrate or edible or tincture. The human touch, it's like, not many people raise and slaughter their own animals. They have to, they get it from the butcher or the supermarket or whatever now. Not a lot of people are growing their own. A lot of people are getting stuff in like vape pens, but even the people that are growing their own have learned it's pretty universal across the world. If you know somebody who grows their own, it's probably going to be seedless unless they're breeding. And I think that's a smaller and smaller percentage of people. There is, more breeders all the time, but that is a clear indication that humans have a huge process, and it's replicated in cucumbers and watermelons and oranges as well, that we like seedless for the pure sake of ease of consumption and the joy of consuming it. It's easier, it tastes better, you don't have to spit out seeds or chew on seeds that might be hard to swallow or anything like that. So it's cool to see that cannabis really does have I think we've kind of evolved side by side as like with one another. Certain strains, like in California, for example, Blue Dream, not as liked among the maybe more working class states, the Midwest and things like that, but it's really highly liked in a lot of the and there's high tech people in every single state. I'm not trying to discriminate or whatever, but California, and it's top in some of the tech cities every single year. It still sells really well, and it's like a really good high focus strain, high energy. And I kind of compared coffee and cannabis recently in a tweet, and I think that for a lot of people, they use it similarly to how people use coffee. They can afford it, so it's not like a struggle for them. They wake up and have it every day, and it helps improve their life. So it's not something. It was in response to somebody kind of referring to cannabis as an addiction, and I think for some people it is, but for most people, I think it's more like coffee. But with that all said, we've got about 2 minutes left.
I'm more addicted to coffee.
I'll say this though, and on the point of like quality, breeding, and all that, I have a small quip to opine, which is that, a lot of people just consider how many people drink instant coffee, even if they can appreciate quality coffee. How many people get instant coffee, or at least get it at like the supermarket or whatever for a nice price, and it's good enough or superior for them. And I think with cannabis, there's a sort of like, I'm going to say it's a selective blindness to this kind of reality when people talk about prices and breeding and cultivation metrics and what people want and what people don't want. And I think that as much as I wish more people wanted like the higher grade stuff, however you quantify that, there's a lot of people out there who will do both. They'll buy the Folgers and they'll buy the nice stuff, but they don't necessarily buy it at the same volume. Anyways,
that's a great point. That's a very good point, and I think a lot of people would be naive to think that every single one of the producers out there is going to be the top 1% that's selling their stuff for however many dollars per pound,
right?
As like the fanciest bottle. A lot more $2 chuck is going to be sold and grown than is whatever $1,000+ bottle.
Yeah. I mean, that's just simple economics, right? That like people can afford something. And that's actually what's so cool about being a home grower is that you can use top shelf cannabis all the damn time because you grow
Right?
yourself. Yeah. I mean, it really is one of the advantages of it.
That's the main
Yeah, you
advantage, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't do that with
unfortunately,
hop
I can't,
or vineyards.
grow my own coffee or chocolate, unfortunately.
Not yet. You got to get the American one. Anything is possible. You know,
There
you
you
get,
go.
get enough land.
I got cocoa beans that could grow, but I'm putting off starting them until I get my gym.
Yeah.
Until I buy that school that closes down, I can use the gym for my greenhouse.
Yeah,
Then I'll get
seriously.
some coffee seeds too. Yeah.
Part-time residency in like the Dominican Republic or something. They grow some great coffee and chocolate in that area. But that being said, we've hit the 6 o'clock hour out here on the West Coast. I'm going to pass it first to Matthew Gates for final thoughts and shout outs.
Great chat, really helped. I'm glad that we as a group were able to help Stegman with his spider mite problem. Again, rest of my video, I'm already seeing that I got a bunch of cool comments from people. I really appreciate the support. Everything you ever wanted to know about russet mites and more can be found on my channel right now today. That's Zenthionol. You can also find other cool information on Instagram and Twitter at SyncAngel. That's SYNCH, like synchronize, and ANGEL, like the mythological creature. And thanks again for the support so far through spring. I'm very excited. I have a lot of other cool things brewing, some collaborations, some videos and things like that coming up. So stay tuned, and I look forward to our mutual success. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to watching that russet mite video because I have not checked it out yet and it just dropped today. So I'm definitely going to, make that right and go check it out and learn lots of cool information, I'm sure. But next up, we've got Dr. MJ.
Hey guys, yeah, this was a fun episode. We went all over the map and talked about lots of interesting things, some of them related to cannabis, and I definitely enjoyed all of the topics. I want to make sure everybody knows about one thing I did talk about on this show earlier. The Spring Autoflower Challenge starts in less than 2 weeks over at Cocoa for Cannabis. This is the Size Matters Autoflower Challenge. And like we talked about, a bunch of us are going to try to grow the biggest auto. You'll have to listen back to the episode to see what strain we're trying to grow. So check that out, cocoaforcannabis.com/challenge. I hope everybody signs up and grows together with us. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then I do the Ask Dr. Coco show every Monday night for my Patreon subscribers. So check me out on Patreon, and grow or love, everyone.
Definitely make sure to support these guys. And next up, we've got Noah, the grower.
Yeah, I had a good time as always. Sorry I was a little bit late there, but was able to go live in my room and show everybody what I got going on in there. And can't wait to talk to everybody next week. I had a great time. I came in right there and the topics were jumbled, which I actually do love. I love all topics, and had a great time listening to everybody talk, and see everybody next week.
It's always fun when we go a little bit off track. I do like.
I liked the poker story myself.
Yes.
Yeah. It's all relates back to the cheap home grow eventually somewhere. But with that said, last and certainly not least of our great panelists this evening, the American one.
Hello, Jack. Thanks as always for the great hosting abilities, and shout out to everyone in chat and on the panel. And yeah, I must take umbrage. The mythical creature, an angel. My mom is real.
It's
angel.
true. It's
My
true.
mom
You're
is
right.
An angel. Okay, let's get that out of the way. And happy Easter to everyone. I am the American one on the YouTube, and the American one _ Keens on the IG. And yeah, if you want to get some amiaceous seeds, I'm pretty sure they're still there at Daga. You could just type in amiaceous.com and it should take you there. And yeah, eventually I'll be getting other ones over there. And yeah, just everyone have a great one. And yeah, I feel it. Spring is almost here. It's almost no more freezing nights. So get those seeds out, figure out which ones are getting on. And yeah, peace out, everyone.
Peace out, Tal. Always great having you. Definitely check out Daga.garden. Amy Aces is some fire, internationally famous lady. Everyone's growing her. You're going to see her in all sorts of gardens. So don't miss out. Don't be jealous of the Amy. Great stuff there. And you can find me on Instagram like my logo right there, at Jack Greenstock, or Jack_Greenstock on Twitter if you want to contact me on social media. If you want to use email, jackgreenstock47@gmail.com. And if you're looking for Velvet Punch, the Velvet Punch F3 is live on 50strains.com, and you could get seeds there. So direct sale only in the US. Thank you to all who've ordered. I ship them out usually same day. And for the people that already ordered them last week, thank you very much. And with that being said, catch you all next week. Jack Greenstock signing out. Peace and love,
Or
everybody.
love everyone.
Keep growing.
Definitely keep growing and fight for your rights. If you don't have them, and even if you do, make sure you keep them. Catch y'all next week.